I remember the day my dad came back from the woods with a look I'd never seen before. It was late November, the kind of cold that makes your breath hang in the air and your boots crunch on frost. He parked his old truck at the edge of the driveway, and I watched from the window as he hauled something heavy out of the bed. The tarp was stained dark, and when he pulled it back, I saw the legs, long, thin, and bent in a way that made my stomach twist. He called me outside, his voice too cheerful, like he was forcing it. "Bagged a big one," he said, grinning wide. "You should have seen it, son." The thing was standing up, just like a man. Never seen a deer do that before. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes didn't match his smile. They were wide, glassy, and fixed on the woods behind me. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting something to follow him out of the trees. I asked if he was okay, and he just nodded, wiping sweat from his brow even though the air was freezing. "Sometimes you see strange things out there," he muttered, almost to himself. "But meat's meat." He dragged the carcass into the garage, locking the door behind him. I stood outside, shivering, feeling like the world had shifted sideways. If I'd known what he brought home that night, I would have run and never looked back. That night, the house filled with the smell of venison roasting in the oven. Mom set the table with her best dishes, the ones she only used for holidays or when company came over. Dad was in a good mood, humming tunelessly as he carved thick slices of meat, the juices running red onto the cutting board. He piled our plates high, insisting we take more, saying, "You won't taste anything like this again, I promise." I watched him closely, noticing how his hands shook just a little, how his eyes darted to the window every time the wind rattled the glass. We bowed our heads for grace, but Dad's words were rushed, almost impatient. He barely waited for Mom to finish before he started eating, tearing into the meat with a hunger I'd never seen in him. Mom and I exchanged a look, but she just smiled weakly and took a bite. I hesitated, the fork heavy in my hand. The meat was dark, almost purple, and the smell was richer, wilder than any venison I'd ever had. Dad noticed me staring and nudged my arm. "Go on, son. Don't let it get cold." I took a small bite, chewing slowly. It tasted off. Not spoiled, but different. There was a metallic tang beneath the usual gamey flavor, something that made my tongue tingle. Mom didn't seem to notice, but Dad closed his eyes and sighed, like he was savoring every second. "Best I've ever had," he said, voice low and reverent. "That deer was special. Strong. You could feel it in the way it moved." I tried to eat, but every mouthful felt heavier than the last. Dad kept talking, telling the story of the hunt in more detail than usual. He described how the deer had watched him from the edge of the clearing, standing upright, its eyes almost level with his. "It didn't run," he said, his voice growing distant. "It just stared, like it was waiting for me, like it knew what was coming." He laughed, but it sounded wrong, too sharp. Guess it didn't know enough. Mom tried to change the subject, asking about the weather, about work, but Dad kept circling back to the deer. He asked if we could taste the difference, if we felt stronger, more alive. I shook my head, pushing my plate away. My appetite was gone, replaced by a cold knot in my stomach. Dad frowned, his face darkening for a moment before he forced another smile. "You'll get used to it," he said. "It's good for you. Makes you tough." After dinner, Dad insisted on cleaning up, waving Mom and me out of the kitchen. I watched from the hallway as he scraped every bit of meat from the bones, wrapping the leftovers tightly and locking them in the freezer. He moved with a strange urgency, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected someone to burst in and take it from him. When he finally came to bed, he was restless, tossing and turning, muttering under his breath. I lay awake, listening to the floorboards creak as he paced the hallway long after midnight. The next morning, I found him standing in the backyard, barefoot in the frost, staring into the woods. He didn't notice me at first, and when he did, his eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale. "Just checking for tracks," he said, voice hoarse. "Gotta make sure nothing followed me home." I nodded, pretending to believe him, but the unease from the night before had only grown. Something was wrong with Dad, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it all started with that deer. Over the next week, Dad's strangeness deepened, settling over our house like a heavy fog. He started spending hours at the windows, peering out into the woods with a fixed, hungry look. Sometimes he'd stand so still I'd forget he was there, just a shadow behind the glass, lips moving in a silent conversation with the darkness. At first, Mom tried to joke about it, saying he was just proud of his hunting skills, but her laughter was thin and brittle. She stopped opening the curtains after sunset. Dad's muttering grew louder, words tumbling out in a low, guttural whisper. I'd catch fragments as I passed by, something about the Watchers, about the old ways, about keeping them out. He started locking every door and window before dusk, double-checking the latches, sliding heavy furniture in front of the back door. "Can't be too careful," he'd say, eyes darting to the trailing. They remember. They always remember. Sleep became a stranger to him. I'd wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow and dragging. Once, I found him standing at the foot of my bed, staring down at me with wide, unblinking eyes. He didn't speak, just turned and shuffled away when I sat up, leaving the door swinging open behind him. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened, but I started locking my door at night, just in case. It wasn't just the pacing or the muttering. Dad started making new rules for the house, strange ones that made no sense. "No lights after midnight," he said one evening, flipping off the switches and lighting candles instead. "They see the lights. They know who's awake." He made us hang a horseshoe above every door, nailing them in place with shaking hands. "Keep the bad things out," he insisted, though I'd never seen him believe in superstitions before. He banned mirrors in the bedrooms, claiming they were windows for the wrong kind of eyes. Mom protested, but he smashed the one in their room with a hammer, then swept up the shards himself, muttering apologies to the empty air. He started burning sage in the corners of the house, the smoke clinging to our clothes and hair. "It's for protection," he said, waving the smoldering bundle like a priest with incense. "You'll thank me when the time comes." At dinner, he'd quiz us on the rules, making sure we remembered every detail. "What do you do if you hear tapping at the window after dark?" he'd ask, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Don't look. Don't answer. Don't move." I'd recite, the words burning into my memory. "Good," he'd say, nodding. "That's good. You're learning." Mom tried to keep things normal, but the tension was a living thing, coiling tighter every day. She started sleeping in the guest room, claiming Dad's snoring was too much, but I knew she was afraid. I heard her crying once, muffled behind the closed door, and I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that your father is slipping away, piece by piece, replaced by something you don't recognize? One night, I woke to the sound of scratching at the back door. I crept down the hallway, heart pounding, and found Dad crouched by the door, ear pressed to the wood. He was whispering, voice trembling. Not tonight. Not yet. I'm not ready. When he saw me, he jumped to his feet, eyes wild. Go back to bed, he snapped. Don't ever come out when you hear them. That's the most important rule. I nodded, backing away, and he watched me until I disappeared into my room. I lay awake for hours, listening to the wind howl and the floorboards creak, wondering what he was so afraid of and what he'd brought into our lives with that deer. The next morning, Dad was gone before sunrise, leaving muddy footprints on the kitchen floor and the back door ajar. I found him in the woods, standing in a circle of trampled grass, staring at a patch of earth where nothing grew. He didn't speak when I called his name, just turned and walked home, shoulders hunched, hands clenched into fists. The rules kept piling up. No whistling after dark. No leaving shoes by the door. No salt on the table. Each one stranger than the last. Each one delivered with a look that dared us to question him. I started writing them down, afraid I'd forget and break one by accident. I didn't know what would happen if I did, but the fear in Dad's eyes was enough to keep me in line. By the end of the week, our house felt like a fortress, every window covered, every door locked tight. But no matter how many rules we followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was already inside, waiting for us to slip up. And every night, as Dad paced the halls and muttered to himself, I wondered how much longer we could keep pretending that everything was okay. It was a few days after Dad started enforcing his new rules that I ran into Old Man Harlan at the edge of our property. I'd gone out to chop wood, desperate for a break from the heavy air inside the house. The woods were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. I was stacking logs when I heard the crunch of boots on frozen leaves. Harlan moved slowly, bundled in layers, his beard white as the snow that would soon cover the ground. He'd lived in these parts longer than anyone, and folks said he knew every secret the forest kept. He stopped a few feet away, leaning on his cane, eyes narrowed. "You all right, boy?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. "You look like you ain't slept in a week." I shrugged, not sure how much to say. Dad's been different, I admitted. Ever since he brought home that deer. Harlan's face went still, the lines around his mouth deepening. "What kind of deer?" he asked, his tone suddenly sharp. I hesitated, remembering the way Dad had described it. He said it was standing up, on two legs, like a man. Harlan's eyes flashed, and he spat into the dirt. "Goddamn fool," he muttered. "Did he eat it?" I nodded, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. "We all did. He made us." Harlan shook his head, looking past me into the trees. "You listen to me, and you listen well. There's things in these woods that wear the shape of deer, but they ain't deer. Not really. They walk like men, and they watch from the shadows. You see one, you turn around and go the other way. You never, ever eat their flesh." I swallowed hard, the memory of that first meal turning my stomach. "What happens if you do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harlan's gaze was heavy, full of old pain. "You let them in," he said. "You invite them into your home, into your blood. They start to change you, bit by bit. Make you forget who you are. Make you one of them." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's rules, boy. Rules older than this town, older than these trees. You break them, you pay in blood." I wanted to ask more, but Harlan shook his head, glancing nervously at the tree line. "Your daddy's in danger. All of you are. You need to get out before it's too late." I looked back at the house, the windows dark, curtains drawn tight. "He won't leave," I said. "He says we're safer here if we follow the rules." Harlan's lips twisted in a bitter smile. "That's what they want you to think. They want you scared, trapped. Makes it easier for them to finish what they started. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch, pressing it into my hand. Salt and iron filings, he said. Scatter it across your doorways and windowsills. Won't stop them forever, but it'll slow them down. And whatever you do, don't eat anything else your daddy brings home. Not until this is over. I nodded, clutching the pouch tight. Thank you, I said, but Harlan was already turning away, limping back toward the road. Remember what I told you, he called over his shoulder. Some rules are written in blood. Don't forget that. I stood there for a long time, the cold biting through my jacket, thinking about what Harlan had said. I remembered the taste of the meat, the way Dad's eyes had changed, the new rules that made no sense. I thought about the way he watched the woods, the way he muttered to himself at night. I wondered if it was already too late for us. That evening, I did as Harlan said, sprinkling the salt and iron across every threshold and windowsill. Dad watched me, his face unreadable. What's that for? He asked, voice flat. Just something I read online, I lied. Keep out bad luck. He grunted, but didn't argue. Mom looked at me with questions in her eyes, but I shook my head, silently begging her not to ask. Dinner was tense. Dad barely touched his food, picking at his plate and glancing at the windows every few minutes. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. Afterward, he went outside, standing in the yard long after dark, staring into the trees. I watched him from the kitchen, the salt and iron a thin line between us and whatever waited beyond. That night, I dreamed of the deer. It stood at the edge of the woods, tall and thin, its eyes burning like coals. It raised a hand, no, a hoof, and beckoned me closer. I woke with a start, heart racing, the taste of blood in my mouth. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, and realized I was more afraid of my father than of anything in the woods. The next morning, Dad was different again. Quieter, more distant. He barely spoke, moving through the house like a ghost. I caught him staring at his reflection in the window, tilting his head as if he didn't recognize the face looking back. I remembered Harlan's words. They start to change you, bit by bit, and felt a cold certainty settle in my bones. I tried to talk to Mom, to tell her we needed to leave, but she just shook her head. He's sick, she said. He just needs time. But I knew it was more than that. I knew we'd broken a rule older than any of us, and now we were paying the price. I realized too late that some rules are written in blood, and once you cross that line, there's no going back. It started with the little things. Dad's appetite grew insatiable. He'd eat leftovers cold from the fridge in the middle of the night, gnawing on bones until they splintered. He stopped shaving, letting his beard grow wild and patchy, and his fingernails thickened, curling at the edges. The house began to smell different, a musky, earthy odor that clung to the furniture and seeped into my clothes. Mom tried to air out the rooms, but the scent always came back, stronger each day. I began to notice tufts of coarse, dark hair on Dad's pillow and in the shower drain. At first, I thought it was just his beard, but the hair was too long, too bristly, almost like animal fur. One morning, I found muddy prints on the kitchen floor, too large for a dog, the shape wrong, the toes splayed and sharp. I followed them to the back door, where the salt and iron I'd scattered had been swept aside, as if something had deliberately cleared a path. Dad's eyes changed, too. They grew glassy and distant, the irises ringed with a strange yellow. He'd sit for hours at the window, lips pulled back in a silent snarl, watching the woods as if waiting for something or someone to return. Sometimes I'd catch him sniffing the air, head tilted, nostrils flaring. Once, I saw him crouched in the backyard at dawn, digging at the frozen earth with his bare hands, muttering words I couldn't understand. He stopped speaking to us unless it was to bark out a new rule. No one goes outside after dark. He snapped one evening, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. Don't answer if you hear your name called. Don't trust what you see in the trees. His voice was rougher, deeper, almost guttural. Mom tried to reason with him, but he just glared, teeth bared, and she fell silent. The fear settled in my chest like a stone. I started locking my bedroom door every night, pushing a chair under the handle. I kept a flashlight and a kitchen knife under my pillow, just in case. I barely slept, listening to Dad's heavy footsteps pacing the hallway, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Sometimes, I'd hear him scratching at the walls, low growls rumbling from his throat. One night, I woke to the sound of something moving outside my window. I peeked through the curtains and saw Dad in the yard, naked and hunched, his body twisted in the moonlight. He was sniffing the ground, following a trail that led into the woods. For a moment, he looked up and our eyes met. His face was almost unrecognizable, elongated, wild, the mouth too wide, the eyes shining with a feral hunger. I ducked back, heart pounding, afraid he'd seen me. The next morning, he was back at the table, eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. But I saw the dirt under his nails, the scratches on his arms, the way he flinched from the sunlight. I realized then that whatever had come home with him from the woods was taking over, piece by piece. I was no longer sure if my father was still in there at all, or if he was just a shell, wearing my dad's face, waiting for the right moment to finish what had begun. The first time it came, I was already awake, lying in bed with my eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the seconds between Dad's footsteps in the hallway. The house was silent except for the wind rattling the gutters and the faint creak of old wood settling. I'd almost convinced myself that nothing would happen, that maybe tonight would be different, when I heard it, a slow, deliberate scratching at the back door. At first, I thought it was Dad, restless again, but the sound was wrong. It was too steady, too patient, like claws dragging across the wood. I held my breath, listening as the scratching moved from the back door to the kitchen window, then to the side door by the laundry room. Each time, it paused, as if waiting for someone to answer. My heart hammered in my chest, and I remembered Dad's latest rule. Don't open the door for anyone after dark, not even family. Then I heard the voice. It was my father's, but not quite. It called my name, soft and pleading, the way he used to when I was little and afraid of thunderstorms. Let me in, kiddo. It's cold out here. I forgot my keys. The words were right, but the tone was off, too smooth, too practiced, like someone trying on a mask that didn't fit. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to go away, but the voice grew more insistent. Please, I just want to come inside. I'm hungry. I miss you. I remembered the salt and iron Harlan had given me, the thin line I'd scattered across my windowsill. I checked it now, making sure it was unbroken, and pressed my back against the wall. The scratching moved to my window, and I saw a shadow pass by, tall and thin, antlers scraping against the siding. The voice changed, growing deeper, more guttural. You're a good kid. Always listen to your old man. Open the door, and I'll make it all better. We can be a family again. I wanted to scream, to run to Mom's room, but I was frozen, every muscle locked in place. I remembered the rules. Don't answer, don't look, don't move. I clamped a hand over my mouth and waited, counting my breaths, praying it would leave. The scratching grew frantic, claws raking at the wood, the voice rising to a howl. "Let me in," it bellowed, shaking the glass in the window. "I'm hungry." Down the hall, I heard Mom's door open. She called my name, her voice trembling. "Are you okay?" Before I could answer, Dad's door slammed open, and I heard him roar, a sound so deep and animalistic it made my skin crawl. "Get away from my house," he bellowed, and for a moment, everything went silent. I crept to my door and cracked it open, peering down the hallway. Dad stood at the front door, his body hunched, hands curled into claws. His eyes glowed in the dim light, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Mom stood behind him, clutching her robe, eyes wide with terror. The scratching at the back door started again, softer this time, almost playful. The voice outside laughed, a sound that was both familiar and utterly wrong. Dad turned to us, his face twisted with rage and fear. "Stay in your rooms," he growled. "Don't answer, no matter what you hear." He shoved a chair under the doorknob and began muttering in that strange, guttural language I'd heard him use in the woods. Mom tried to pull him away, but he pushed her back, never taking his eyes off the door. The thing outside circled the house for hours, scratching, tapping, calling out in voices that shifted from Dad's to Mom's to my own. It whispered secrets only we would know, promises and threats, trying every trick to get inside. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth, repeating the rules over and over in my head. Don't answer. Don't look. Don't move. Sometime before dawn, the scratching stopped. The house fell silent, the air heavy with exhaustion and fear. I crept out of my room and found Dad slumped against the door, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Mom sat on the stairs, tears streaming down her face. I joined her, and we sat together in the gray light, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, Dad was gone. The front door stood open, the salt and iron scattered across the porch. I found hoof prints in the mud, leading into the woods, and a single tuft of coarse, dark hair caught on the splintered doorframe. Mom and I didn't speak. We just cleaned up the mess, locked the doors, and waited for night to fall again, knowing the thing that wore my father's voice would be back, and that the only thing keeping us safe were the rules we followed, and the hope that we wouldn't forget them when it mattered most. The next night, the air in the house felt thick and electric, as if a storm was about to break. Mom barely spoke, her eyes hollow and red-rimmed. I kept the salt pouch in my pocket, fingers tracing the rough fabric for comfort. Every sound made me jump, the groan of the old fridge, the wind rattling the gutters, the distant bark of a dog. But it was Dad's footsteps that made my heart pound hardest, heavy and uneven, echoing through the hallways like a warning. He appeared in the kitchen just after sunset, looming in the doorway. His clothes hung off him, torn and dirty, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor. His beard was wild, and his eyes glowed faintly yellow in the dim light. He sniffed the air, lips curling back to reveal teeth that looked too sharp, too long. "You didn't lock the back door," he growled, voice layered with something inhuman. "You want to let them in?" I stood my ground, blocking the entrance to the living room where Mom sat, clutching a rosary in trembling hands. "You're not my dad," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "You brought something back with you. You let it inside." He laughed, a guttural, animal sound that made my skin crawl. "I am your father. I'm just better now. Stronger. You could be, too." All you have to do is let go." He took a step forward, and I saw his hands, fingers fused, nails black and split, more hoof than human. I backed away, heart hammering, remembering Harlan's warning: salt and iron. Never eat the meat, never answer the voice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pouch, scattering its contents in a line across the floor. Dad recoiled, hissing, his eyes narrowing. "That won't save you," he spat. "They're already here. They're everywhere." He lunged, moving faster than I thought possible, but I ducked behind the table, grabbing the iron fireplace poker I'd hidden there earlier. He slammed into the table, sending dishes crashing to the floor, and I swung the poker with all my strength, catching him across the shoulder. He howled, stumbling back, smoke rising from the wound where the iron touched his skin. "You little bastard," he snarled, voice warping, echoing with other voices, some I recognized, some I didn't. Mom screamed, and Dad turned toward her, eyes wild. "Stay away from her," I shouted, swinging the poker again, forcing him back. He circled me, hunched and snarling, saliva dripping from his mouth. "You can't fight what you don't understand," he whispered, voice slithering into my ears. "You're just meat. All of you. Meat for the old ones." I remembered the rules. Don't look, don't answer, don't trust what you see in the trees. I kept my eyes on the floor, refusing to meet his gaze, and recited the rules out loud, over and over, like a prayer. He shrieked, the sound inhuman, and charged again. I threw the last of the salt in his face, and he staggered, clawing at his eyes. "Mom, run!" I yelled, and she bolted for the door, fumbling with the locks. Dad lunged after her, but I blocked his path, swinging the poker with desperate strength. He caught the iron in his hands, skin sizzling, and roared in pain. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear, or maybe the last shred of the man he used to be. "Please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Come back, Dad. Please." He hesitated, body trembling, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might stop. But then his face twisted, and he lunged again, mouth open wide, teeth gleaming. I drove the poker into his chest, salt and iron burning into his flesh. He screamed, a sound that shook the walls, and collapsed to the floor, writhing and convulsing. Mom pulled me away, dragging me out the front door and into the yard. We watched through the window as Dad's body twisted and shrank, bones cracking, fur sprouting along his arms and neck. His face elongated, antlers bursting from his skull, until there was nothing left of the man we knew. Only a monstrous thing, half deer, half man, writhing in agony on the kitchen floor. With a final, shuddering gasp, the creature dragged itself to the back door, smashing it open and disappearing into the woods. The house fell silent, the only sound our ragged breathing and the distant, mournful cry of something not quite human echoing through the trees. I collapsed in Mom's arms, sobbing, knowing that whatever had left our house that night was not my father, and that the rules had saved us, but at a terrible cost. The house felt hollow after he was gone, every room echoing with memories of the man he used to be. Mom and I moved through the days like ghosts, cleaning up the wreckage in silence. The kitchen floor was stained where the salt and iron had burned into the wood, and the back door hung crooked on its hinges, splintered from his escape. We barely spoke, each of us lost in our own thoughts, haunted by the sounds and sights we could never explain to anyone else. At night, I lay awake, listening for footsteps that never came, flinching at every creak and groan of the old house. Sometimes I thought I heard his voice in the wind, calling from the edge of the woods, but I never looked, never answered. The rules were carved into my mind now, each one a scar I'd carry forever. I thought about the warnings I'd ignored, the signs I'd missed, and the price we'd paid for breaking rules older than memory. The threat was gone, but the fear remained, a shadow that would never fully leave us. I keep a notebook by my bed now, its pages filled with rules I never want to forget. Some are old, passed down in whispers and warnings, but most I learned the hard way. I write them out every night, my hand steady even when my heart isn't. Never eat meat from an animal that walks like a man. Never answer a voice calling from the woods after dark, no matter how much it sounds like someone you love. Keep salt and iron at every door and window. Don't look out the window if you hear scratching. Don't trust what you see in the trees. If someone you love starts to change, remember who they were, but don't let them in. There are things out there that wear familiar faces, things that wait for you to break the rules. I just hope someone listens before it's too late.